Robert Williams tapped his gavel with practiced precision. The court finds you guilty of multiple parking violations. Fine set at £500. Across the courtroom, Emma Johnson clenched her jaw. The fine would empty her savings account, money she'd been setting aside for research expenses. She approached the bench, eyes steady. Your Honor, I understand the violations and accept responsibility. But I request a payment plan or community service option. The full amount would create significant hardship for me. Judge Williams studied her with cool detachment. At 58, he'd heard every excuse imaginable. His reputation for strict adherence to the letter of the law was well earned in their small English town of Millfield. The courtroom was quiet as everyone waited for his response. The old wooden benches creaked as people shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Johnson, rules exist for a reason. The fine stands as stated. Next case. Emma felt her heart sink. The research for her book would have to wait now. She had been working on it for months, trying to document the life of one of the most important judges in their region's history. It was ironic that the very man she was studying was now the one creating an obstacle in her path. As Emma turned away, her notebook slipped from her hands, pages scattering across the courtroom floor. Papers flew everywhere, landing near the feet of the court clerk and the prosecutor. Emma quickly dropped to her knees, frantically gathering her notes. The judge noticed several pages contained his name, newspaper clippings about his cases, and detailed notes about his career. His eyes widened as he saw his family history documented in careful handwriting. Ms. Johnson, he called sharply. Approach the bench immediately. Emma froze. Everyone in the courtroom stared at her. Her heart beat faster as she collected the remaining papers and walked back to stand before the judge. His face showed confusion and suspicion. What is the meaning of this? He asked, holding up one of her pages. Why do you have detailed information about my career decisions? And my family? Emma swallowed hard. This was not how she had planned to tell him about her project. She had hoped to approach him formally, with a proper proposal. Now she looked like she was obsessed with him or planning something inappropriate. I can explain, Your Honor, she said quietly. Judge Williams leaned forward, his voice low and serious. I certainly hope you can, Ms. Johnson. Because from where I'm sitting, this looks very concerning. The court clerk watched with interest. The next defendants waiting for their cases to be heard whispered among themselves. Emma felt her cheeks grow hot with embarrassment. I'm a historian, she explained. I've been researching your career for a biography I'm writing. Your decisions in the Matthews integration case and your work on judicial reform make you an important figure in our region's legal history. The judge's eyebrows shot up in surprise. This was clearly not what he had expected to hear. A biography, he repeated, sounding skeptical. And you didn't think to ask permission before digging into my personal history? Public figures are often subjects of historical research, Emma said. I was planning to request an interview once my initial research was complete. Judge Williams studied her face carefully, looking for signs of deception. The courtroom remained silent, everyone watching this unexpected drama unfold. Ms. Johnson, you will wait in my chambers after court adjourns, he said finally. We need to discuss this matter further. And the fine still stands. Emma nodded, gathering her papers with shaking hands. As she returned to her seat, she wondered if her project was now doomed. Would he forbid her from writing the biography? Would he report her for inappropriate behavior? The rest of the court session passed in a blur. Emma could hardly focus on the other cases being heard. She kept thinking about the months of research that might now go to waste. And the fine £500 she couldn't afford to pay still hung over her head. When the court finally adjourned, Emma waited nervously as Judge Williams spoke with the clerk. Then he motioned for her to follow him to his chambers. With a deep breath, she gathered her things and walked toward what felt like an uncertain fate. Emma entered Judge Williams' chambers with her heart pounding in her chest. The room was smaller than she had imagined, lined with law books and family photos. The judge sat behind a large oak desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he examined more of her scattered notes. "Sit down, Ms. Johnson," he said without looking up. Emma lowered herself into the leather chair opposite him. She noticed his office smelled of old books and coffee. A clock ticked loudly on the wall. "I've been on the bench for 25 years, he said finally. "People have written newspaper articles about my more controversial decisions. But no one has ever attempted a biography." He looked up at her. "Why me?" Emma took a deep breath. "Your early work on school integration changed this town. You faced threats and still did what was right. That matters historically." The judge leaned back in his chair. "That was a long time ago." "History doesn't expire, Your Honor." A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "No, I suppose it doesn't." He tapped her notes with his finger. "You've been thorough. Where did you find information about my father's arrest in 1965? "Town Archives," Emma replied. "I've spent most weekends there for the past 6 months." Judge Williams looked surprised. Most biographers would have requested an interview first. "I wanted to be prepared," Emma explained. "I needed to understand the context of your decisions before asking about them." The judge studied her with new interest. "You're taking this quite seriously." "History deserves serious treatment," Emma said simply. Judge Williams nodded slowly. "About the fine." "I'll pay it," Emma interrupted. "I just need time." "That's not what I was going to say." The judge removed his glasses. "I'm still concerned about your parking violations. The law is the law. But I'm also intrigued by your project." Emma sat up straighter. "Does that mean you'll consider an interview?" "Perhaps." Judge Williams glanced at a photograph on his desk. "But I have conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "First, I want to review what you write before publication." Emma frowned. "I can't promise that. It would compromise the historical integrity." "I won't ask for changes," he interrupted. "Just the chance to provide context if needed." Emma considered this. "That's reasonable." "Second," the judge continued, "I want to know why this matters so much to you personally. These violations show you've been parked outside the courthouse for hours at a time, multiple days per week. That's more than casual research interest." Emma hesitated. She hadn't planned to share her personal connection. "My grandmother was involved in the civil rights movement here. She always spoke about a judge who made fair decisions when others wouldn't." "I believe that was you." Judge Williams' expression softened slightly. "What was your grandmother's name?" "Mary Johnson. She organized community meetings at First Baptist Church." The judge's eyes widened in recognition. "Mary Johnson? The teacher?" Emma nodded, surprised. "You knew her?" "She testified in several early cases." Judge Williams stood up and walked to a filing cabinet. He pulled out an old folder and placed a photograph on the desk. "Is this her?" Emma leaned forward. The photograph showed a group of people on the courthouse steps. In the front row stood her grandmother, much younger but unmistakable. "Yes, that's her." Judge Williams sat down heavily. "I remember her courage. The threat she faced for speaking up. That's why this biography matters," Emma said quietly. "People should know what happened here. The real stories behind the court decisions." The judge was silent for a long moment. "The fine stands, Ms. Johnson." Emma's heart sank. "But," he continued, "I'm offering an alternative. The court archives need organizing. Years of important cases are gathering dust in the basement. 6 weekends of work would satisfy your debt." Emma could hardly believe what she was hearing. "The archives? I would have access to them?" "Under supervision," Judge Williams clarified. "But yes. Those records might help your research as well." Emma tried to contain her excitement. "That's more than fair, Your Honor." "Robert," the judge said unexpectedly. "If you're going to write my biography, you should use my name." As Emma left the chambers, she felt a strange mix of emotions. The fine still hurt her finances, but the opportunity to access the archives was invaluable. And somehow, the stern judge she had observed from the gallery had become a real person, a man with memories and connections to her own family history. This biography had just become much more personal than she ever expected. The Emma arrived at the courthouse early on Saturday morning. The building looked different without the usual crowd of people rushing in and out. It was quiet, almost peaceful. She carried a coffee and a small bag with her notebook and lunch. The security guard checked her temporary pass and pointed her toward the basement stairs. "Judge Williams is already down there," he said with a surprised look. "Never seen him come in on a weekend before." Emma thanked him and made her way down the worn stone steps. The basement was cooler than the main building, with dim lighting and a slight musty smell. Row after row of metal shelving held boxes and files, some looking like they hadn't been touched in decades. She found Judge Williams, Robert, at a large table in the center of the room. He wore jeans and a simple blue shirt instead of his usual black robes. Without his formal clothes and tall bench, he looked smaller, more human. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," he said, looking up from a file. "Ready to begin your community service?" "Yes, Your Honor, Robert," Emma corrected herself. The name felt strange on her tongue. He smiled slightly. "This section contains cases from 1960 to 1975. Many need to be properly labeled and organized chronologically." He pointed to several boxes. "I thought we'd start here." Emma set down her things and pulled on the cotton gloves he offered her for handling old documents. "Did you come early to prepare?" she asked. Robert nodded. "I haven't been down here in years. Wanted to make sure everything was accessible." They worked in silence for the first hour, establishing a system for sorting the files. Emma couldn't help noticing that Robert handled each document with care, sometimes pausing to read portions of old cases. "I found something you might find interesting," he said eventually, sliding a file toward her. Emma opened it to find newspaper clippings about a school integration case from 1970. "This was one of your first major decisions, wasn't it?" "Yes. The school board wanted to delay integration for another 5 years. I ruled against them." Robert's voice was quiet. "Not a popular decision at the time." Emma read through the articles. Some praised the ruling while others criticized it harshly. One photo showed Robert, much younger, walking through an angry crowd outside the courthouse. "You received threats," Emma said, noticing a police report in the file. "Yes. My wife wanted us to move away." Robert's face showed a flash of sadness. "But this was home." "That took courage," Emma said. Robert shook his head. "It was just following the law as written." "Many judges found ways around that same law," Emma pointed out. They continued working, breaking only for lunch. As the afternoon progressed, they fell into conversation more easily. Robert shared stories behind some of the cases, and Emma told him about her grandmother's work in the community. Near the end of the day, Emma found a letter that made her gasp. "Robert, look at this." He came to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder. It was a letter from a community group thanking the court for its fair ruling in the integration case. Among the signatures at the bottom was Mary Johnson, Emma's grandmother. "They organized this thank you letter," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "My grandmother never told me about this." Robert studied the letter. "I remember receiving this. It meant a lot during a difficult time." "Did you know her well?" Emma asked. Robert sat down. "Not well, but we spoke several times. She was always respectful but direct." He smiled at the memory. "Once, she told me the courthouse steps needed a ramp for wheelchairs. Said justice should be accessible to everyone." "That sounds like her." Emma smiled. "I had that ramp built the next month," Robert added. As they packed up for the day, Emma felt something had shifted between them. The judge was no longer just a subject for her biography but a real person connected to her own past. "Same time next Saturday?" Robert asked as they climbed the stairs. "I'll be here," Emma promised. Before they parted ways outside, Robert hesitated. "There's a box I kept separate," he said finally. "Personal papers and photographs from that time. Not court documents, but they might help with context for your book." "I'd love to see them," Emma said, surprised by his offer. "Next week, then." He nodded goodbye and walked to his car. Emma watched him go, thinking about how differently this day had turned out from what she expected. Her fine still hurt her finances, but she had gained something much more valuable, the real story behind the history she was trying to tell. The END3 Saturdays had passed, and Emma now moved through the courthouse archives with confidence. She and Robert had established a comfortable routine, working in companionable silence broken by occasional questions or discoveries. Today, Robert arrived carrying a worn cardboard box that wasn't part of the court archives. "The personal papers I mentioned," he explained, setting it carefully on their work table. "I found more than I remembered." Emma felt a flutter of excitement. This was beyond what any biographer could hope for, private materials offered willingly by the subject. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I'll be careful with them." Robert nodded. "I know you will." He hesitated. "I'll be upstairs if you have questions." "Take your time." Emma watched him leave, surprised by this new trust. She opened the box to find neatly organized folders, old photographs, and newspaper clippings. Some papers were yellowed with age, their corners soft from handling. She started with a folder labeled Early Career, finding law school papers and notes from Robert's first cases as a young attorney. His handwriting was neater than, his legal arguments passionate and idealistic. The second folder contained family photographs. Emma paused at one showing a young Robert with an older man who had the same strong jawline and serious eyes. On the back was written "Dad and Me, 1965. The next folder made her heart skip. It was labeled Johnson Community Group. Inside were meeting minutes, flyers for community events, and more letters, all connected to her grandmother's civil rights work. A single photograph slipped out. It showed Robert's father standing beside Emma's grandmother at what appeared to be a community meeting. They were both smiling, looking proud. Emma stared at the image, confused. Robert had never mentioned his father knew her grandmother personally. She dug deeper, finding more connections, letters between them, planning documents for protests, and newspaper clippings reporting their joint work. Underneath everything was a small journal with Thomas Williams written inside the cover. Robert's father's private thoughts. Emma hesitated, feeling like she was intruding. But this was offered for her research, so she carefully opened it. The entries detailed Thomas Williams' involvement in the civil rights movement, his frustrations with slow progress, and his admiration for local leaders, including Mary Johnson. One entry stopped Emma cold. "Arrested today with Mary and others. The protest was peaceful but the police weren't. Spent the night in jail. Worth it for the cause, but worried how this will affect Robert's future. A judge's son in jail isn't a good look." Emma checked the date, May 1965. Robert would have been around 18 then, preparing for university. She read on, discovering that Thomas Williams had been a key figure in local civil rights efforts, often working directly with her grandmother. His arrest had made headlines, creating problems for his law practice. But he never stopped fighting for equality. The final entry was written in a shakier hand. "Doctor says my heart isn't getting better. Not much time left. Robert promises he'll continue the work his own way, through law and justice. Mary visited today. We both know our children will carry on what we started." Emma sat back, overwhelmed. Robert's father and her grandmother had been close allies. Their children, Robert and Emma's mother, had grown up in the shadows of these civil rights struggles. And now, by chance or fate, Emma was writing Robert's biography. She gathered the materials and headed upstairs. She found Robert in his chambers, staring out the window. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma asked quietly, placing the photograph of their parents on his desk. Robert turned, his face solemn. I only recently made the connection myself. When you mentioned your grandmother's name that first day, it sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. Then I remembered my father's stories. They were friends, Emma said. More than that, they were partners in the movement. Yes. Robert nodded. After I found that box in my attic, everything came back. My father was arrested for protesting. Your grandmother bailed him out. And they wanted us to continue their work, Emma added. Robert smiled sadly. In their own way. My father pushed me toward law school. Said a black judge could make changes from the inside. My grandmother encouraged my interest in history, Emma said. Said someone needed to tell the true stories. They sat in silence for a moment, taking in the weight of this shared history. This changes the biography, Emma finally said. It changes more than that, Robert replied. It changes how I see my own story. He looked at her directly. And perhaps how I see the present, too. Emma understood. The strict judge who would find her was also the son of a civil rights activist, carrying on a legacy in his own way. And she, trying to capture this history, was following in her grandmother's footsteps as well. Our story didn't begin with a parking ticket, she said softly. No, Robert agreed. It began long before either of us realized. The E&D Emma worked late into the night for the next several weeks. Her small kitchen table disappeared under stacks of notes and photocopied documents. The biography had transformed from a simple account of an important judge into something far more complex, a story of two families whose paths had crossed and recrossed through decades of struggle for justice. The final Saturday of her community service arrived faster than she expected. 6 weekends had passed quickly. Though her parking fine had been paid through her work, Emma felt strangely sad that her time in the archives would end. When she arrived at the courthouse that morning, Robert was waiting with 2 cups of coffee. I thought we might need this, he said, handing her a cup. We have one last section to organize. They worked steadily through the morning, filing the last of the 1970s cases. At lunch, Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. I've been thinking about your project, he said. The biography. Emma looked up from her sandwich. Yes? I'd like to help more directly. Perhaps regular interviews about my more recent cases? There's context that doesn't appear in the official records. Emma nearly dropped her drink. That would be invaluable. And, Robert continued, I've spoken to the court administrator. They've agreed to hire someone part-time to continue organizing these archives. I recommended you for the position. Emma stared at him. Me? But why? You know the system now. And you clearly care about preserving this history. He hesitated. It would also give you ongoing access for your research. Emma felt tears sting her eyes. The part-time job would help with her finances, and the continued access to records would make her biography truly complete. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Robert replied simply. Later that afternoon, as they prepared to leave the archives for the last time as judge and community service worker, Robert handed Emma a sealed envelope. What's this? She asked. Something I wrote last night. My own account of the school integration case. Robert looked slightly embarrassed. It might help with your book. Emma thanked him, tucking the envelope carefully into her bag. That evening at home, she opened it to find several handwritten pages. Robert's account was deeply personal, describing his fears, the pressure he faced, and the memory of his father that guided his decision. It was honest in a way she hadn't expected from the formal judge she first met. At the end, he had written, I've never shared these thoughts with anyone. But history deserves the full truth, not just court opinions. My father and your grandmother understood that. 6 months later, Emma stood nervously in the courthouse lobby. Around her, people gathered for the launch of her book, Beyond the Bench, Justice and Community in Millfield. Robert stood nearby, looking uncomfortable in the attention but pleased. The town mayor spoke first, praising the book as an important contribution to local history. Then it was Emma's turn. She stepped to the small podium, looking out at the crowd. "This book began with a parking ticket," she said with a smile. The audience laughed, including Robert. But it became something much more, a story about how justice works in a community, how the past shapes our present, and how sometimes the most important connections are the ones we don't see at first. Emma held up the book. "Judge Williams allowed me to tell his story honestly, including the difficult parts. That kind of courage is rare." After the speeches, as people lined up for signed copies, Emma noticed Robert speaking with an elderly man in a wheelchair. When she approached, Robert introduced him. "This is James Taylor. He was the first black student to attend Millfield High School after my integration ruling." Mr. Taylor shook Emma's hand warmly. "Your book got one thing right for sure. This man changed my life." He nodded toward Robert. "When they tried to stop me at the school door, I remembered the judge said I had every right to be there. Gave me courage." Later, when the crowd had thinned, Robert found Emma packing away her unsold books. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said quietly. "That first day in my chambers, when I offered you community service instead of the fine, I had already recognized your name." Emma looked surprised. "You knew who I was?" Robert nodded. "Mary Johnson's granddaughter. I'd heard she had a granddaughter studying history. I just didn't connect it until I saw your research." "So you planned this all alone?" Emma asked, amazed. "Not exactly. But I believe some things come full circle." He smiled slightly. "Our parents would be pleased, don't you think? That their children found a way to work together?" As they walked out of the courthouse together, Emma realized that what had begun as a simple historical project had become something much more, a continuation of work started long ago, and perhaps the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives. The end.